it was Tracy Chapman. It was Suzanne Vega. It was
Big,
Jewel.
big artists.
And Sarah was really just breaking in the States, like breaking big. It was just happening for them. And Paula, too. And the tour was fucking huge. Almost every single date of every Lilith Fair was a sellout. And if it wasn't a sellout, it was really close.
My business is your business. It's all up in my lady business with me, Mary Nisi. Welcome to All Up in My Lady Business. And we've got a repeat offender, Jessica Hopper, back on the pod today. Thank you for coming on today, Jessica.
Thank you for having me, Mary.
For those of you out there in non-pod land that maybe haven't been listening to all the podcasts that I've done with Jessica, this is her third appearance on All Up in My Lady Business. So I'm really glad to have you back.
Thank you, Mary. It's great to be here. I'm just going to keep saying that.
How many times am I going to keep introducing you? So for those of you who don't know who Jessica is, Jessica, why don't you give us a little background on who you are?
I was born in Indiana.
You
in
were?
1976. Yeah.
Okay.
That's all you need to know. I am
music journalist.
Yeah, I was going to get there. I was going to get there. I grew up in Minneapolis in the music scene there and started a fanzine when I was 15. And that was kind of my intro to this world of underground music. And then I got my first check. So I guess I became like a professional writer at 16 and started working in music and as a music journalist for some time. And then in the last 10 years, I've worked more as a director and a producer of all sorts of documentary work. I directed in, 2022, 2021, a 4-part series called Women Who Rock. And most recently, I was executive producer of Lilith Fair, Building a Mystery, which is out on Hulu Disney worldwide and CBC in Canada. And it's based on my oral history from 2018 of all the women. Of Lilith Fair. I did about a 10,000 word oral history, 12,000 word oral history about Lilith Fair for Vanity Fair in hopes that it would be developed into a documentary because it seemed like one was really needed. The story of Lilith Fair was so culturally misremembered and was also just sort of unknown to a whole generation of younger music fans and women in music who, to me, it seemed like they could really stand to build on this history and know it and not just keep having to reinvent the wheel, but rather build on
that particular mystery.
Yeah, to solve that mystery, to Nancy Drew it and go behind the stairway and visit the secret of the old clock. So I'm just making Nancy Drew jokes here.
Yeah.
Yeah, just riffing.
So I wrote this oral history that was in Vanity Fair, and then they were like, we need to turn this into something. And it's interesting to say that you misremember.
Who's the they in this was me Disney. And some other. No, it didn't even go that direct at all. It was like, and then 7 years later, this movie came out,
It was hard on you. I do remember living through that part of it with you.
Yeah, I mean, it was like it was in the trenches. We were in the trenches, but yeah, did the oral history, and then it got optioned, and then it got optioned again, and then we combined forces. Some of the people who'd been working on it. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's sort of like the Lilith Project was like a stone that was like rolling and gathering more and more people into it. And then about 2 years in to that whole process of figuring out what this was going to be and how we were going to do it. And were we going to fund it this way or that way? And then Dan Levy became attached to the project and brought in Ali Pankyu, who became our director. And
Dan Levy from Schitt's Creek and amongst other things as well. For those who...
I mean, just absolute icon in both Canada and America. Yeah, because Lilith was really important to him that he had gone. And it was it was the first place that, he saw as a young closeted tween, saw queer people happy, joyous, and free in en masse, you know, and so it was life-changing for him. So him putting his weight as you know, the power of his name and his power as a producer and his production company behind it, and it helped a lot of things come together. And then we just spent the next couple of years in the trenches, and it was a long process because there was an ungodly amount of footage of Lilith Fair, which, you know, was a tour that went over 3 years, and it was like 100, all in, it was like, you know, 135 dates, and we had footage from all of them, you know. It was just an absolute trove of material. And so,
I'm
you
glad
know,
that Sarah McLachlan had the, like, I mean, it had to have been her desire, her idea to have the film crew that was following them.
where the bulk of this footage came from was they were like a really early sort of like, I think one of the first, if not the first, concert tour to live stream, and they were uploading digital content and had, you know, like, and so somebody would run around with like a video camera and just get all this stuff, but then they also had like a video photo booth for people's memories. And then by the third year, there was, you know, these venues they're playing huge, as they call, like big sheds and stadiums. And so,
Mhm.
and with crowds of 50,000, 60,000 at the Rose Bowl, you have to have, you know, the huge, you know, like a projection screens, or, you know,
Mhm.
simulcast screens. And so by year 3, there was like a documentary film crew had already been following them around. There was already kind of like these folks with video cameras, like handy cams, little
Mhm.
mini DV. And then the third year, there was, you know, like high quality, basically like broadcast quality video to choose
And then
from the simulcast. And so then it all went at one point, just a lot of it
yeah.
went into this kind of like storage space archive where all these sort of artifacts and audio and all this stuff in Canada.
So basically they recorded it all and then just like put it in a room and then forgot about it?
I don't think they forgot about it per se, but, you know, there had already been,
There wasn't a plan for the stuff when they
no,
got it.
and also there was uh, you know, I think a Canadian based documentary that I think it was called Lilith on Top. And there were some, you know, there were other things, and there was VH1
Yeah.
footage, and there was all this other stuff. But like, you know, when you're starting to work on a documentary that so much time has passed, you know, there's a lot of just tracking stuff down.
Yeah, I'm
There's a
sure. I mean, especially when you see some of the stuff that's in there, like the footage of the behind the scenes of them coming together with the, like, trying to figure out what song they were going to end on, or just like jam sessions. Like watching those, my friend Emily and I sent you a copy of this, or a screenshot of this text, but she was like, if anybody ever asks me if I could go back in time to anything, it would be backstage at Lilith Fair. And that's the statement. I agree with it. And that is something that I personally would not have thought until I watched this documentary. I was, at the time, a total bitch about Lilith Fair. I was too busy smoking cigarettes in the empty bottle to, you know, think that I was the kind of person that would go to something like that,
Mhm.
and, you know, making fun of it. I mean, it did become like this sort of like cultural punchline. In fact, today I was looking at something about Galentine's Day from Parks and Rec. She defines it as Lilith Fair without the angst. And it's funny because watching the Lilith Fair documentary, there is no angst. And it's just how misunderstood, and like, and it turned out to be what, the highest grossing tour of the 90s.
Behind Garth Brooks, which if you were alive in the 90s,
That's insane.
and yeah, because Garth Brooks was like the air we had to
He was
breathe back then.
oxygen. Not like
Yeah,
Chris Gaines, between him and Chris Gaines, he took on a lot of Garth Brooks.
it's like Rope in the Wind tour, and then it's Lilith,
Mhm.
you know, and you look back at it now, and you know, we've had plenty of these documentaries that as Yasi Salik of Bandsplain calls them, we're sorry about the 90s, like sort of apologetic docs, you know, where it's like, you know, important things like, you know, the Free Britney doc, and, you know, the Pamela Anderson doc, I mean, but there's kind of like a score of them.
Mhm.
And it's really stunning, I think, for people to go, how did people get away with this? Like, this stuff is so openly misogynist, and it's a little hard to believe. But then you see what Lilith faced just to get off the ground, and how much people at the time said, "You can't do this. You can't do this." And there's at the beginning of our documentary, it does show some of these. They basically decided to like kind of test pilot these shows.
Sarah McLachlan and Paula Cole shows.
It was Sarah McLachlan. Paula Cole was opening for her, and then they decided to kind of do like kind of these mini Liliths that were at an amphitheater that's like on the Detroit, border,
Canada border, like in Hamilton
something like
or whatever.
Yeah, there was something there, and it was 15, but it was 15,000 people, and promoters were like, "There's no fucking way you can do this, because if you put more than one woman on a bill, then you cancel out the audience of the rest of them." And so
men can't like female artists is the real.
Yeah, but also that it's like that was the lie that they had to tell with.
Oh, and just the implication that women's money isn't the same value as men's money.
But the other thing too was, it was just, well, if you put these two women on here, there was this idea that their fan base was finite and infinitely overlapping, that it would be like, yeah, 2,000 people come out. But so these first shows were Sarah and Paula, and they got Amy Mann, they got Lisa Loeb, Patti Smith, handful of other folks, and it sold out. 15,000 sold out. And so what they did was kind of this test run in 96 so that they could go to promoters and say, "No, look, we did sell out numbers at a big shed. This isn't such a risk." And people were like, "That was a fluke." And, as Jewel says in the film, women aren't a fluke. And so then what happens is, they put together the tour. They didn't, they were acting on faith. They didn't know. They had no idea. There was not any precedent for this, but they open at the Gorge, and they sell out the fucking Gorge. And, you have to kind of work with telling a bigger story faster in documentary and some of these things in oral history, where it's like, we can talk a little bit more about how the actual story went. And then, so we were sort of synopsizing. But what happened is, they do this show at the Gorge, and they said, then it was like, Portland and like kind of like around up here. And then they said by the time they were kind of on the second or third date, they were hearing LA was a sellout. All these people saying this isn't going to fly. And it was 2 nights, 50,000 people a night at the fucking Rose Bowl on the 5th and 6th dates. Like, and all they had faced the entire time was headwinds, people talking, promoters of other festivals, promoters of other festivals, being anonymous sources on stories saying like, "Oh, we hear it's chaos over there. There's no way. Lollapalooza just failed. How could this win?" And it was like, because this is really different. And this is an audience that is so hungry and starved for a concert festival experience that speaks to them, where they feel safe, but also these are the artists that they love. It was Tracy Chapman, it was Suzanne Vega, it was Jewel.
Big artists.
And Sarah was really just breaking in the States, like breaking big. She had already had some hits. It was just happening for them. And Paula too. And the tour was fucking huge. Almost every single date of every Lilith Fair was a sellout. And if it wasn't a sellout, it was really close.
One of the things I noticed when I was watching especially when it went from like 97 to 98 to 99, was how in the first year was very much like there were no screens, like there were no jumbotrons. It was just the stage. There was no lights. There was no everyone was using the same backline. Like it felt smaller. It felt like almost punk rock but that's probably what festivals were looking like at that time anyway. And just seeing how, as the years went on, they would wear, bigger outfits, the lighting got better, the jumbotrons got better, and just how different the vibe was from the first one to the last one. And, but still it wasn't like they were running around in, limousines and acting large. Like they all kind of were still being themselves and doing those group press conferences every single day. Why did they do that?
Well, there was it was a cultural zeitgeist. It was a cultural zeitgeist. It was enormous. It was everywhere. Part of the reason they did it was was really because that's where they would do their donation.
Mm.
Every single date they gave $1 from every ticket, which is $2 and change today. And they would give that to a local, what were then called battered women's shelters. And now we call them, domestic violence organizations. But that what they were doing, and some of them went to like breast cancer charities. And when I talked to all these folks who were on the tour, they would say that was, in some ways, that was our favorite part, but that was why they did the press conferences. Every day was a chance to do that and elevate the work of these people and show that and show that it was possible too, because back then, $30,000-$50,000, which is double that today, was like a massive that could allow some of these places to operate for a year. And what they wanted to do was give something back to the women in each community they wanted Lilith to touch each community in a deeper way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you when you get to the credits of the film, and it tells you, they donated $6 million. I mean, that's to small nonprofit women's organizations that were making a real difference in women's lives.
You almost want to see a documentary on the people that, as a result of receiving that money, what they were capable of doing.
We can guess, right? It just was such, Lilith Fair did just really profound good for the people who were on it, the people who benefited from it, the people who went. We talk in the documentary, we couldn't even cover more than a handful of, we interviewed so many people. There was so many people that we talked to, and artists and people that went, and organizers and artists that weren't affiliated with it. And, Allison Wolf talking about like how it was seen by Riot Girl and how it was, all these different things that we got into. And there's just no way you can tell the whole story. But
can you speak more to that? Like about the Riot Girl reaction to Lilith Fair?
Yeah. Allison said that things about how it was.
I don't know who Allison Wolf is.
Allison Wolf is one of the women that was co-founder of Riot Girl and sings in Bratmobile and was also in Party Line and a bunch of other bands, but really just like a central Riot Girl figure. And she's talking about she said, maybe I don't think I really understood what it was, but also, she talked a lot about at that time, the gulf between the underground and how mainstream a lot of these artists was pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that maybe if you're kind of into punk, that you would go to this was maybe
not happening.
Yeah, because it was Sheryl Crow and it was some other stuff where it was plenty of people who were alternative, but there was a much bigger gulf. There was a much bigger distinction. And also because this was kind of in this immediate post-grunge world, there was also still at that time kind of like a contraction in the underground, because there had been in the previous 5 years so many people and so many artists and bands in the wake of the Nirvana of it all and the Jane's Addiction of it all, where there was just still a very deep distinction between the palatability of the women headlining Lilith. I was at that time when Lilith was happening, I was certainly interested in going. I love Tracy Chapman. Tracy Chapman was my first show. And first thing I ever bought tickets for. Well, actually, first thing I ever bought tickets for was Sinead O'Connor at the State Fair in Minneapolis, but she got pregnant. She canceled that tour.
Fair in Minneapolis. Sinead O'Connor was going to play the State Fair in Minneapolis.
I think so, or on the State Fair grounds. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think it was the actual State Fair. That would have been a little weird. But anyways, it was $5 ticket. That was the first time I bought anything. Anyways, but I would have loved to see Tracy Chapman. She's incredible. But at that time, the idea that I would have even had whatever it was, $27 to go to the show. Even, I think the women of Luscious Jackson kind of were they're kind of a little bit of the voice of that, because, they were on Graham Royal Records and Graham Royal Capital, whatever, but they were definitely more of coming up out of the underground. And even though they were on popular radio stations or, alt rock, they were outside of alt rock stations, they kind of had some hits. They were people were telling them, this will kill your career to be associated with something that's so mainstream, or this idea that it was because it was safe, that it was milquetoast. And, Ann Powers speaks to it in the film about how there's this idea of like, if there's women are involved in rock, there has to be like, they're going to ruin it because they're going to demand comfort. She says something sort of that towards that end. And that's very much like how does something as successful and as radical as Lilith become maligned for its success is like, oh yeah, because this isn't real. Because of course, if we look at like the big picture machinations of all that was pushing against them, going, people saying, this is going to ruin your career if you say yes. You're not going to be able to have X, Y, and Z opportunity. And all the kind of like grand mythology that I think a lot of folks who are marginalized within music, you hear it in all different ways all the time. And I think it's really insidious because part of it is like, it is the project of patriarchy to disconnect us from previous generations. It's to keep us busy reinventing the wheel. It's to think, oh, if we make these men with power, their bands or whatever, if we can kind of like make them happy and focus on them, we won't be put out to pasture like those women that they're telling us are like uncool and not successful and no one wants to, or they have no power. And then you get to a certain point. I think this happens for a lot of us that kind of stick around. And, I'm 49. I've been in the biz for some 30,000 years.
30,000.
And yes, and since the Pleistocene era. So
the woolly mammoth and you were contemporaries.
I wrote in on the back of a woolly mammoth and said, bitch, I'm here. And then you get to a certain age and you're like, why? As Joni Mitchell once commented, after too many parties up at Glenn Fry's house in 1975, I'm like 34 and I'm the oldest woman in the room. What has happened here? And you start to kind of go like, wait, I'm going to be put out to pasture too. No matter what I do, no matter what kind of money I'm making people, no matter that I'm at like the peak of my power,
You're still a fluke, regardless. Even at 34 years old and being an ancient person, you're still a fluke.
Yeah, even if you're fucking Joni Mitchell, they're gonna kick you out eventually, girl. But so all of this, it's like, and then you kind of have this dawning awareness of like, wait a minute. Those women got kicked out because they do have power and they know it. And they assert it and they insist on it. And they're like, no, I get paid what I'm worth now, or I don't work with that man, or like
If they didn't have something to say, they wouldn't be silenced.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that's a big part of the kind of the undercurrent of the story of Lilith. One of the women that I talked to said it wasn't until she got to Lilith that she realized I can design my own merch, and looked around and go, some of these women, it's their merch with like their face and their name on it. And she was like, I had always been told it's like best to leave all these things to the men because they understand what sells. And she was like, and then I realized at that point, I looked around, I saw women like Bonnie Raitt, and I saw women who even had like kind of like less career and power than she did, having much more control. And she saw that she kind of trusted the lie that she had been given. I think part of the reason Lilith was such a threat, not only was it success, but it proved so much of what they had been told was a lie. And there was a lot of sharing of intel and power. And so then all of a sudden you get these women walking away from Lilith going, fuck you, you can't play two of us back to back. Fuck you, I can't design my own merch. Fuck you, I can't go on tour and bring Fiona Apple and Amy Mann and whoever on this tour to support me. The idea that Sheryl Crow had just had like infinity hits and was being told by promoters, you can't fill a shed. Women can't headline a shed. And a shed is basically, a big shed's like 15,000 outdoor, seating. They were saying, Sheryl Crow, you can't do that. You can't do those numbers.
I mean,
and it was just absurd. But they said women can't headline. And she had been with a lot of her peers pushing up against that, and we talk a little bit about this. It gets discussed in the original oral history, but that some of these women were looking at doing 4 nights at a 3,000-seater venue because people at the next level were saying women can't headline.
So they're playing for 15,000 people just over 3 days
Yeah, but
instead
it's like
of
it's
like
it's like ameliorated over,
Yeah.
a couple days. And that was happening to Sarah on her previous tour where it's like, how many nights you gonna do at the Orpheum? How many nights you gonna do at the Chicago Theater? And then you're on tour for fucking ever.
Mhm.
Because in any major city you're doing 3 nights because they won't let you up.
Well, I will say one of the th along that same line was in the fair in the documentary when they were well, the interesting thing is that a lot of the artists that were on Lilith Fair all of a sudden were nominated for Grammys, like, that they maybe probably wouldn't have been nominated for had they not had the exposure from Lilith. Paula
Maybe.
Cole, I mean,
Maybe, but the thing was, I mean, with the Grammys, you can't tell, but also if you look at the music they were making, I mean, these women are like, I mean, Sean Colvin is considered a master of songcraft.
yeah.
Sheryl Crow, you know those pictures of Sheryl Crow, like from around that time where it's like, she's literally holding 8 Grammys like it's a
Mhm.
big, giant, fat golden baby.
So you don't think that I mean, they kind of implied it from on the show, and I kinda have to agree,
Yeah, no. I think it
but that
really
I think
did elevate them. It did
yeah,
elevate them, but also Paula, I mean, it was such a historic night. Paula got nominated for 7 Grammys, and she
mhm,
was the first woman nominated for producing as producer of the year for producing her own record, Missy, in like a rock category. I think her and Missy were like maybe the same year or year, maybe Missy was next year. Yeah, I mean, it's like, and so that was absolutely historic. That was
and
absolutely historic for Paula, is like to be nominated for producer of the year for her own record.
mhm,
That had never happened. But it was a big fucking deal
yeah,
because just between the 3 women who were on the Lilith stage for the medley, for their like, let's Kelsey Grammer, let's give it up for all
mhm,
that women did this year. And then when you see that they're like up against Hanson and R.
yeah.
Kelly and that and you're just like,
Well, and, again, for those who haven't
"Ugh."
seen the documentary, Paula Cole, Sarah McLachlan, and, was it Sean Colvin? Was she the 3rd one who was nominated? In the 97 or 98 Grammys, I guess it would be, and all the other artists that were nominated got singular performances, and all the women were lumped into one group, which is ridiculous. I mean,
And they
it
had to
is
play, they said, they talk about the indignity of having to perform this like really unmusical medley where like the 3 of them are just sort of like sandwiched together. And it was like, they each got like a minute of their song, 90 seconds of their song.
mhm.
And the indignity of that, because also it was like Paula should have had,
Everybody else would have gotten it,
she was
would have
doing
gotten
she
their
was doing Beyonce numbers that night in terms of nominations, and they gave her 90 seconds, there's some.
do you think that's punishment for doing well?
No,
Like, in
I think it was like really like a lack of imagination, and that they probably wanted to just be like, this will be like a mini Lilith Fair, and this is the closest way. It's really hard to understand the motivation around a lot of how these women were treated within the industry, and how much of it was guys just saying that's just how it is, and that's how it's always been. And this really is a film about
what happens
this.
when you do it yourself?
Yeah, but also it's a lot of them going, well, how it's always been is super fucked, so we're going to try another way because it can't. Not to say it's like, if I'm already kind of like on the losing end of this shit stick, like let me do it my own way.
If you're not gonna let me in, I'll make my own thing and see how it goes. I mean, I think we've both been people that
Yeah,
kind of do that anyway, and it
yeah.
kind of speaks to the spirit of a lot of women now are also kind of realizing their power. I think there's a huge movement of women realizing, like, this is all bullshit, and why are we holding up these old ideas of how the world has to operate? And,
And how they have to operate on stage. If we're just talking about artists, like I just went and saw, Lorde the other night.
with me, we were there together.
Yes, yes. I went and saw Lorde the other night with my friend Mary Nisi. And it's like, I remember, I mean, do you remember when they did the first big close up on her face? And we could see she didn't have makeup on. She just
Mhm,
had glitter.
mhm.
And she wasn't out there. She wasn't tending to this idea of what a young pop
Pop star. Mhm.
artist is supposed to be doing on that stage at all. And instead, she sat down and had 4 songs where she is her own backing, and she's doing it on her
Laptop,
laptop with
yeah.
her MPC right there. And I was like, she is showing everybody in that room I am the creator of this work.
Like, this is how I did it, was with my
This is how
laptop
I
and this
did it,
little
but
thing.
also demystifying it.
Mhm.
And
But I
also, you got to see it to be it. And also, I mean, I just thought it was the most feminist goddamn thing I had
Mhm.
seen on a big stage
She had
since.
big jeans on and a big shirt. I mean, she kinda took us some off as the show went on, but
But there was no outfit change, and also, and this is like absolutely zero shade to anybody that is performing like Spanxed within an inch of their life, but she came out there dressed like anybody who would have been in the fucking audience,
yeah.
and it just, she did a lot of things to demystify it, make it accessible, and close that gap between audience and performer as best you can do in an arena.
And
And
I
I
could see
just,
bruises on her legs, and I mean, it was imperfect. It was like
yeah,
it was
yeah.
exactly and I also noticed that it was like everything was it was black and white. There was no color at all in the imagery that was happening, and there was a lot of, like, handheld cameras by the dancers that were also with her, so there was no real quality control around what it was gonna look like, every single show was its own thing.
Yeah, and I just thought, given how much is put on, the previous many eras of women as pop performers to be bulletproof, unimpeachable. We're not going to see any of your cellulite, or whether it's the Supremes in there, and LaBelle back when it was Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, with and they would have to perform in like the long white opera gloves, the dinner gloves.
Ooh, is that something? I don't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like this real show of like fancy modesty,
Oh, okay.
for girl groups to wear gloves.
Okay.
And
It wasn't like white gloves to make them like, appear almost white.
no, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than I even know, but it was like kind of this very coiffed womanhood, that there's a long, long history of that. And, to see the different ways that young women artists and queer artists in particular are. And I really do see it as a feminist queering of these things, because it is dismantling these old structures and just saying, no, I can really do this on my own terms. And if I can't do it on my own terms, then I don't want this kind of success, you
Mhm.
know?
They didn't really get into it in the documentary. The show, Lilith Fair stopped in '99, and then they tried to do it again in 2010, and it just couldn't come together. And
That was a
what
horrible, I mean, that was like peak recession time. That
Yeah,
was also,
totally.
yeah, I mean,
But
it was like when they had planned it, they're like, we didn't know that, like, there was like this insane
global meltdown happening.
yeah, about to happen, but also that it was decimating the American concert industry. And we could have done a whole nother half hour on 2010, but like it really saddled their legacy with
Mhm.
this misremembrance that it had been a failure. But the thing was, a lot of tours that year canceled.
Sure. I
But
guess
a lot of them weren't that ambitious. And so, but, and also it's
uh,
just the misogyny of it. It was like, how dare you try to come back? How dare you
well,
try to
and
come back and think
that's
that
the
people
thing.
still care and need this?
Well, the same thing could be said to Lollapalooza, and that worked out.
Hmm.
But the fact that they did this and then didn't try it again until 2010, and then we're like, I mean, it sucks that like they did it, they proved it was correct, and then no one was willing to build on that and realize that it was a template for a different way to do it instead of, it kind of just ended and has sort
Hmm.
of this sort of fizzling out that happened. And I don't think that point was made that it was also at a time in the document, it did make a real big point around the recession of it all. It's just sort of the kind of it was just sort of
I
mentioned
mean,
as
it
like
was
a
it was it was one of like, those, basically it was like when they had started planning it, the recession had not quite hit yet. And then by the
Mhm.
time it was coming together, it was like it was not a good environment for it. But also that there was some of it because they were, no one knew what was coming,
I
basically.
mean, I'm
And it
not
was just
blaming them for not
no,
making it
no,
in
I
2010,
know you're not.
but it's almost like the lessons of Lilith Fair were like in a time capsule that was sealed in '99,
Hmm.
and then, they kept going on with Warped Tour and however many times they tried to do Woodstock after that.
One of the things that we couldn't even get into, though the Indigo Girls and some other folks mentioned it, was like all of a sudden they couldn't get played on radio. Part of what happens, I mean, this is like, again, it's a whole other story, and there's a good chunk of this in the oral history if people want to go back to it.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. what happens kind of as you get to the end of Lilith is, and it's still booming, 99's still big, you know, and there is something that happens within radio, and it's kind of like there's a splintering of genre, and 38 stations, I believe it's 38 stations in America, turned to the new format called adult contemporary. And all the alt rock stations, where the likes of Sinead O'Connor and the likes of Suzanne Vega and the likes of Amy Mann and the likes of, you know, Sarah McLachlan was a alternative radio staple. And, you know, Natalie Merchant. Alternative radio is built on the back of Natalie Merchant's success with 10,000 Maniacs.
Mm-hmm.
Her, Sinead, and Tracy, and a handful of other folks who were all Lilith performers.
Sheryl Crow.
And also Susie Sue, who then was like, you know, also a Lollapalooza headliner. But those women really were the fundament of alternative radio. And then Meredith Brooks, who was on Lilith, was the last woman to have a #1 hit on alternative radio while she was on Lilith. The next one was Lorde 20 years later.
I'm sorry.
20,
she was
25.
The last. She was the last what?
Woman to go #1 on alternative radio, and then it doesn't happen until Lorde Royals. But so what happens is all these women who are at the peak of their careers post Lilith, they all have the biggest audiences that they've ever had and biggest sales they've ever had. They post Lilith all get siloed over to these 38 stations that are all brand new in this format that is like adult contemporary, and it's them, and it's like the fucking Wilcos of the world. But this is true story, because what happens, and you see this happen at the same time on hip hop radio and R&B radio, that alternative rock, part of the reason it becomes so big is because of these women, right?
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Alanis, Hole, everybody, you know, like just it's the zeitgeist. But alternative becomes codified around Green Day, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, all the fake Nirvanas that came after Nirvana,
Sure. the Stone Temple Pilots, and
yes, and that becomes what
Live.
alternative is. And all these women, with the exception of like Alanis, get pushed off over to these fledgling stations that people don't even know, onto 38 stations at the time when, at that point, mainstream pop top 40 stations in major markets were turning into alternative stations, because that was big bucks. And then all of a sudden, what you also have happening, particularly in like hip hop, urban R&B, is that all these women had just made that fly into the stratosphere. You know, Missy, TLC, Salt and Peppa, Aaliyah, everybody, Monica, Brandy, like it's going off.
Family
Erica.
Affair.
Mary
J. Blige. Mary J. Blige.
You know, and so, but then all of a sudden, they can't get on the radio unless they have a cameo from a male rapper. They can't get on unless Ludacris or, you know,
quite frankly, Puffy or
whoever is doing a verse or is whatever. And so it's something that you really see come to a head in every genre, including country, even though women were really pushed out there. But like Shania in the fucking 90s.
I mean, that was pop. I mean,
but these genres that these women build, they get pushed to the margins of all of these. Are saying you can't be in here unless you have Ja Rule on a verse. I'm sorry, tough shit. And they changed the rules because they couldn't have women all the way
just succeeding.
Being in full throttle power. Because what would that do?
What would it do? That's the question. When all of these things come through, I'm just like, what is it? Because it almost, I mean, quite frankly, if we're gonna, it almost feels like DEI. And it's like, because they have to, like, you know, they're actually doing all the work. They're doing all the things you have to do. No one's just giving them things. They're actually proving the point. They're doing the hard thing. No one's, you know, like passing their stuff on and sneaking it in and paying people off. Like, they're actually just hardcore doing it. And the only thing I can think of when I hear things like that, like men are pushing women out, is that it's like they were able to do it without having the connections. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, if they could, like, I don't want to think about what I could do if I didn't have to work as hard as they did.
I mean, I think it all gets back into these, like infinity layered shit sandwich that is the patriarchy,
That's
the cis hetero patriarchy. But yeah, I mean, it's like, well, what's going to happen if these women know their worth?
Mhm.
What's going to happen now that they've
If they can make their own merch.
if they've shown themselves and others, you can do it on your own. So we gotta basically make them invisible. And that's what happened to Luscious Jackson. They talk about it, and that's what happens to Cheryl. That's what happens to a bunch of these people. I mean, Cheryl continues to be like an enduring American icon because Cheryl just stays kicking down the motherfucking doors. You cannot, and not to say, oh, you can repress these other women. And Erykah Badu obviously has had an incredible fucking career and a lot of things post Lilith, but like, in the oral history, folks talked about hearing promoters or radio guys backstage going, never again. We're never letting them get away with the Lilith Fair again.
But why wouldn't? Is it because they're not making money off of it? Like, I don't understand why the never again.
It's power. It's power. And power is, yeah, sure, it's also about money, but I think it's so much of the music industry and so much of the ability to control women and their ambition and their dreams is about, this forever idea of like that. It's like, if you're a woman in the music industry, you have to have powerful men as your like envoys or to kind of protect you or to go soothsay the other men so that you can make a little progress and all this.
Yeah.
And Lilith and so many components of what was happening and the, what we now call like kind of like the virality of some of these ideas being feminism, being women's power, even being like women's earning power, but also going, oh, there's actually this huge underserved market of women who feel really empowered by this. It's like these women claimed their own power and they proved all these things to be like a grandiose lie. And they proved all these things to be, they showed how hard this industry, writ large, was interested in trying to distort their thinking about themselves so that they were controllable. Because what happens if you're a Sheryl Crow, a really no nonsense, like it is not up for debate what a fucking genius you are, blah, blah, blah. And this whole time you've been told you can't sell out anything more than 8,000 people in Chicago. And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to step around you motherfuckers. Oh, it turns out I draw 35,000 in Chicago. Then all the people that were invested in that lie, they're the guys that were invested in that lie were doing so to uphold their own power and their own bottom line and their own patriarchal sense of like, this is how the world is and you can't challenge it.
But what didn't it kind of turn out to be how the world went, because it stopped and then it can't? I mean, I'm just, it's the legacy of it is like trying to understand like I'm not like holding your feet to the fire on this. I'm just sort of just thinking
No.
like,
But this is the other thing, Mary. I mean, we think about what's the long tail? What's the long tail on this? Even though like a lot of the story got buried, we find out that Olivia Rodrigo dug until she found it. She whatever, like however she found like the wiki for this and then was like, wait a minute, what? Why has this story not been told? Or, however she found it. That the women in the documentary, whether it's Teo from Get Down, Stay Down, or I mean, plenty of other people that we talked to who, we couldn't include everybody, but people who are big shit activists and stuff said this made me see what was possible and it formed my sense of what music could do, what community looked like, what a safe space was when I was 12. And I've never strayed from that. It's the long tail of this is being borne out continually, I think. But also much like, a lot of different movements, it just because it didn't basically turn patriarchy inside out like a sock, doesn't mean that it failed. But that's part of the thing. And I mean, I remember hearing this a lot about it kind of in the immediate wake of like kind of the dissolution of Riot Girl being like a really active going concern when, you know, in the late 90s. And people going, well, if it was such a success, how come things are still sexist? You know, it was never women saying that to me, but, you know, like being like, well, that was a failure. You know, I think a lot about this also in relation to things like the Battle of Seattle. Part of the reason it was so successful is because it was like, all right, we got the dock workers and we got the anarchist punks and we got the tree sitters and we got the people who do the giant like street theater and we got all these fucking pissed off people from around the country who are coming here, and we're all going to work together. And during that time, they innovated a lot of things that became kind of like a lot of the de facto, like what works in protest movements. And even at the time, people go, oh, well, this was a failure. But then it's like you look at it retrospectively and go, no, this changed the way that like things were happening 10 years later within the vast swath of international politics and also political movements. But that's also very much how I look at Lilith. It's like, yeah, this thing happened and it was like a big bang. It didn't come here to be like the toilet brush of feminism on like the American music landscape. All you got to do is show people what's possible.
100% on that. I mean, representation matters, as I...
Yeah, but also it's like you got to see it to be it. It was so important for us to find all this footage of you know, women rigging cable.
That was cool too, to see all those women working on the back end and like doing it and being like, we had no choice. We had to figure this out, and just figuring it out. And like, you know, that was hot.
Well, and also, you know, there's some of the stories that we couldn't tell, but that you can find them on social media is like, you know, these young women who wanted to work on Lilith and they couldn't get hired, maybe for some reason or not, but they were like, I have to be on Lilith. And, you know, the woman that became Brandi Carlile's manager, her entrance into the music industry was that she was the Biore rep. She was the Biore rep. Yes, that was like 80% of the reason that in year 2 was like every punchline for Lilith was like, I mean, that's how Biore became a thing. But anyways, like, you know, a lot of these people who started on Lilith and going, wow, this is what I can do. This is what I can do if someone empowers me. You know, now they're out tour managing Reba McEntire 20 years later, you know, or they worked their way up through things, but because they started with Lilith, you know, much like Erykah Badu says, it's like my welcome to this industry was Sarah McLachlan and Bonnie Raitt.
I mean, how about Missy Elliott's first live performance was Lilith Fair? And at that point, I mean, wasn't she already winning things? Like, how could you have a career without a tour, without ever performing live? Like that blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Erykah Badu's first tour.
Yeah.
Missy's first tour. Bunch of people's first tours. You know, India Arie got signed off of Lilith. She won a local contest to be on.
I mean,
even Erin from Buchan Gase. She was like the local talent contest winner in 1998 on Lilith. Like, there's indie icons up in these troves. Amy Mann's first solo tour,
but also just even the idea that like I thought was also very impressive, the course correction when they got, you know, the criticism that it was too white, and then they were like, oh great, God, thank you for showing that to me, and then brought in a bunch of people of color the following year and then kept that going. Like, it's learning from mistakes, not being defensive, being nimble, being able to change my mind and admit when something is wrong or right. Like, these are the things that I think women bring to pretty much every organization, and that is seen as, it's almost like you said earlier on, that they would demand comfort, that was one of the things that they thought would be, and that would be bad.
And that would be bad.
That's a bad thing to want to bring, to make the concept of being in these places and going to these places maybe not as gross and piss stained as every rock club I've ever been in.
It was very interesting to get the perspectives of the women from Luscious Jackson, Kate Schauenbach in particular. They played Lollapalooza the previous year.
I saw them on Lollapalooza the previous year.
And Kate talked about they would need security to go walk and out in the audience, that they would take golf carts because people would throw stuff at them, or there would be like, just like rivers of piss, or like for some reason, they couldn't get like side stage passes, even like as people on the tour, and like just faced all kinds of real standard issue second class citizenry. But also the interesting thing is that the head of security on Lilith had come over from Lollapalooza. And he told us not told us everything, but he was like, you cannot measure how different it was. It was night and day. Any other festival did not have, we would come into these places and have to brief local staff and venue security about how to do it the Lilith way.
Like, we're not here to rough people up. We're not here to.
But also, you're gonna telling people, be like, you're gonna see women kissing, you're gonna see men kissing, there's gonna be babies here. There is gonna be, and this is in the oral history, but we tried so hard to find footage of it, but like the week or a couple days before Lilith gets to Alpine Valley for the first time, the promoters call Lilith Fair and they're like, so we just had Ozfest here like 2 nights ago, and the entire audience ripped up all of the sod out of the ground and threw it on stage. So it's real muddy, and it was like, that was what was happening everywhere else.
And it was accepted. Everyone was just this is part of it.
Yeah. I mean, you think about all the ways that that became such an expected behavior.
Destruction.
Yeah, destruction. And then it's like, yeah, of course we needed a Lilith Fair. You gonna bring a baby to Ozfest?
Mm-hmm.
Someone's gonna call DHS on your ass. Like, come on. No, you're not gonna even when you see people bringing the kids to Lollapalooza now, because it's like, whatever, under 12 is free, and it's like, and you're like, wow, you're taking a chance there, Dad.
Yeah. No, it's not your
No, and it's like you look at what Lilith Fair was and the vibe, and yeah, I'm sure it was really, really easy for people to write it off and make fun of it because, in rock and roll, I mean, Ann Powers has said this, Beth, in her writing and in our documentary, is like, what's more antithetical to rock and roll than moms?
Yeah.
Everybody stay safe. That idea.
I mean,
that idea
moms.
Of like, I know. And that's the thing. And how much have we probably internalized this too? But that it's like someplace where you could be a mom. You could see a mom. You could see a mom on stage. You could breastfeed your baby.
You're not going to see a mom getting pregnant though there, which you would maybe see happen at well, I mean, maybe, but it's just, I was kind of a nod to the Woodstock where there were sexual assault happening. Like,
yeah,
it's just,
no, we're not. No. It was like, a lot of people said it was like the original safe space before there was safe space. What a novel idea.
Yeah.
If you make a place that is safe, affordable, cool, like it's going to do a good thing. There's a lot of great music. Like,
yeah.
Oh, Jesus, fuck. We better take the power out of these women's hands fast enough. I mean, that's women's involvement, people's comfort, something that's as fucking gay as hell as Lilith was absolutely a threat. And then the quiet other little under part of it is like, it was really born out of like a real Canadian kind of like, we're all in the same gang socialism.
Yeah.
Too. It's been a really interesting week of having Lilith out in the world, because at the film premiered at the Toronto International Film Fest to standing ovation and rave reviews and, stuff that was, I don't want to say beyond my imagining. I knew it would happen. I knew it would happen for it, but it was pretty freaking cool. And then for the LA premiere a week later came amidst Jimmy Kimmel's suspension and all of that. And the artists who were slated to perform at the premiere banded together and pulled out in support of free speech and saying, we cannot. They withdrew their labor. I mean, standard. It was basically like a micro strike. And the red carpet was canceled. Then and then the performances themselves, the performers, Sarah, Jewel, Olivia Rodrigo, Maya, I think there were some other people who were slated to show, said we can't do that, and did it in Disney's house to the ABC brass. So I think it was all of a sudden our film was part of the zeitgeist, but it is absolutely the Lilith way, and kind of what I've said through this whole thing. And we've learned it as producers and everybody who worked on the film. It's like anything that's of Lilith, there's like a, I don't know, like a transitive quality to it where it's like we face some of the very same battles that Lilith itself faced. But also there was this sense of like, and we will have that same sort of connection with audience that Lilith had because we are of this. And so it's like, I really think of this film as culturally, it's like a coda. And then also, if you see the film, there's a certain storyline that these women standing up and saying we won't perform is also kind of like this coda of something that happens in the film as well. And I just thought, like, of course, because when people see this and see all that Lilith did and see how much of a lie we've all collectively been fed and how much it's been buried and how radical it was, you know, like they gave health care. They did extended health care. They did all of these things that people now are still fighting bitterly for. And people go, oh, it's not possible. Yes, it is possible, but everybody's going to make less money and everybody's going to have to pitch in on this stuff. And we're going to have to agree to prioritize the well-being of the group rather than so-and-so's going to get star treatment and going to make 50% of the ticket, you know? Yeah. Or that we're going to do this Led Zeppelin style and you're going to get 90%. You know, but that it's like everybody's going to make less money. Sorry. Who cares?
And not that much less. That's the other thing too.
I think that tour did so many remarkable things, and part of the reason its history has been buried because it shows examples that anybody can build on, frankly. It shows activism and innovation. And the innovation is treating everyone like a fucking human being. And people having autonomy and safety and care and having it be reciprocal. Oh my God, how novel. But they're going to tell us that it's like radical and revolutionary.
Yeah. Impossible to do. Impossible
to do.
Well, Jessica, this has been incredible. We've really talked forever. I could keep going.
Mary, thank you for having me on again. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about all of this because I can just like...
It's great to have context, you know?
I just think it's also just a really inspiring story. And I love these women and the last few years of really being in the trenches on this with, you know, the women who are producing alongside me and Allie and Dan and Sarah and everybody who really just been in the trenches on this film for a long time. To see it come out in the world and touch people, you know, I mean, it's like, but also it's like, but that it's like enough people have told me this week, it's like, this is the first thing in so long that has made me feel hopeful. And I just think it's like,
it's really good timing. I really feel like
it's really wild in that way. Yeah. And it's like all I've ever wanted in telling this story from its inception is like, as I learned more and more about these women and artists and interviewed them again and again in the oral history and, you know, in the research for the doc and watched hundreds of, you know, literally hundreds of hours of footage, they are so like the wind in my feminist sails now. I've gained incredible mentors through doing this. But the really big idea is like, look what happens when music fans can connect with this, the radical possibility of this, and artists can connect with this matrilineage that until you really see how, again, radical it was for its time and still remains radical, I just think it's just so hugely inspiring.
I hope that it kind of eliminates. Yeah, I hope it eliminates the like just the kind of like retconning it. You know, kind of people forget that they're it's a thing to be made fun of, and now it'll actually be the cultural, you know, benchmark.
It will right size it. I hope so. Thank you for having me, Mary.
Bye, Jessica. Thank you. Thanks for listening to All Up in My Lady Business with me, Mary Nisi. We'd love for you to like, review, subscribe, follow us at All Up in My Lady Business on the gram. And if you're a female identifying person and you want to dance, you can follow. I mean, everybody can follow it. But if you want to be a part of the magic at Hot Flash Dance Party, sign up for the mailing list to find out where our next party is going to be. And if you are looking for a DJ in the Chicagoland area or anywhere else, you know, money's the same color everywhere. Fly us out. ToastandJamDJs.com has the best. And listen to my radio show. I have a radio show on Chirp Radio at chirpradio.org. That's Mondays every Monday from 12 until 3 p.m. CST. Today's episode is produced by Shiraz Dada. Theme song composed and performed by, you guessed it, Shiraz Dada. All right, guys. Peace out.